Baltimore and weeks, and you'll be seeing it out on ESPN that we talked about at its genesis. And I remember this guy running into me in some parking lot, probably at an Oakland Raiders game or something out on the West Coast, talking to me about it. But he is a Baltimore guy. Many of you familiar on the prep scene. He was a hell of a quarterback around here at one point in his life, but he has moved out to Los Angeles and he makes films. And we welcome Bobby Sablehouse back onto the program to talk about all things 30 for 30, his Dunbar project, and the Baltimore Boys, which will be debuting on the 8th of August. But you can also find it out on a web search if you catch this on the backside of that. He is a producer out in Los Angeles. You can follow his work at Bobby Haas, that's Haus, out on Twitter, as well as at thefilmhaas.com. But for many folks, Bobby Sablehouse, you need no introduction around here in Baltimore, man. Welcome back. What's going on, my friend?
I appreciate you having me on, Nestor. Thanks for the great introduction.
Well, I don't know about all that, but I'm familiar with you throwing the football around a long time ago and seeking colleges and all that stuff. You've certainly created a nice little second life here with a passion of yours, right?
Yeah, it's been great. I think with my sports background, obviously playing football and then going on to college and just being a passionate sports fan, the fact that I'm able to bring sports and entertainment together is certainly kind of a dream scenario for me right now.
Well, give me the lowdown here. This will be a lot of people's first sort of entree with you not playing football and making a film here. This obviously is going to get a lot of attention here in our community, and it's one of my favorite stories that is untold. But more than that, dude, I worked inside the Baltimore Sun and the Baltimore News American with Kathy Frazier, who used to go down onto Orleans Street and cover these teams, as well as Sam Davis and back in the day and all the prep department stuff that I did with basketball and girls basketball. I remember all this stuff. When I see the Dozier kids running around now, I remember the old Doziers running around 30 years ago. And I think everyone around here remembers the stories of Bob Wade who are, let's say, 40 and above. Guys like you and me. But there's a whole segment of people that, Dunbar isn't putting kids actively into Georgetown with John Thompson anymore and the Lefty Driesell Wars and, all the things that happened here. It's quite a rich story you've had the opportunity to tell.
Yeah, I think, like you said, for guys that are, for people that are 40 plus years old, they remember those early 80s Dunbar teams very well. And I think what this film has given us an opportunity to do is show not only the people of Baltimore, but I think the country, what a special team and program that this was at Dunbar, not only in the early 80s, but going all the way back to the Sugar Cane days, and we touch on that a little bit in the documentary. So, such a rich sports history at Dunbar, and specifically basketball during that time period. So it was really, and you said it's one of the great untold stories, I think, in this country, and I think a lot of people will be surprised. But I think they'll really enjoy it.
All right, so let's go to the beginning of this thing here. You escaped out of here as a football player. You go out to L.A., you start to make films or be involved in the film industry out there. Soup to nuts, how does a story like this, I don't want to say get missed or passed over, because the 30 for 30 franchise and these incredible documentary storytelling, I think we've all seen a few of them, if not many of them. But, you got involved with this and you wanted this to be an ESPN thing, and your idea was brought forth on this. Give me the whole genesis, because this is a 30-year-old story. I mean, you've been working 30 for 30 on this, right?
Right. So this came about where one of my friends, who's my producing partner, out here on these sports series, he and I went to smoke cigars, and we were just hanging out here in L.A. And
what kind of cigars? I'm just kidding. It's California. I have to ask, so it's fun.
Of course, it's the granola state. So anyway, we were sitting there having cigars, and we were talking. We're like, we have to do a 30 for 30, which is easier said than done. But I think we were both at the point in our careers where we had good networks. We're idea guys, and he said, we have to do a 30 for 30. What are some of the great untold stories? And literally the first thing that popped in my head was Dunbar and in the early 80s. And I told him, and he said, of course. He grew up in New York, was a big New York basketball fan, knew all about prep basketball in New York. But he also knew about the Dunbar Poets. So at that point, we said, okay, well, first we need to line up the talent, which we need to get Muggsy on board, and we need to get Coach Wade on board. because once we get those guys on board, I think everything else will fall into place.
Well, why wouldn't they want their story told at this point, right?
Sure. I mean, that was my pitch to him, and I called Coach Wade and I said, Coach, this is a great way to get your story out there. It's your legacy, it's Muggsy's legacy, it's the team's legacy, and I'm a Baltimore kid. I think I'm the guy to tell this story because I have a real connection to it emotionally. And he was on board, which was great. Obviously to get him on board, to have him participate, him and Muggsy, was a great first step for us. And then we ended up taking it to ESPN as a pitch over the phone. And this doesn't happen in Hollywood, Nestor. You don't get on the phone with executives, pitch something, and halfway through the pitch, they basically stop you and say, "We want to do this." I think they saw the quality of story and kind of the untapped story that this was, and so from that point on, they said, "Let's put it together and make the film."
I've written a couple of books, and every time I sit down to write a book, I think, man, I know a lot about this subject, like that's why I would want to write the book to begin with, right? And then you start to peel back the onion, and you start to talk to people closer to the fire, When you talk to Joe Flacco or John Harbaugh about the Super Bowl, you learn things you couldn't have possibly known, especially when they start to open up and become candid, and especially, I think, when there's a little time and a little distance set between it all, and there's time to sort of reflect upon all of it. I would think for you knew a lot about this, and I feel like I know a lot about the Dunbar story from having been around these people and having been on the radio for 25 years and having sat across the table from Bob Wade and across a bar with Muggsy and Charles Barkley at one point telling old stories and stuff. But then you get into it. What did you learn that you did not know about their story when you began this effort?
Oh, I mean, a ton. I think that, the headline is, 4 guys on the same high school basketball team go on to play, in the NBA. Reggie Williams, Reggie Lewis, David Wingate, Muggsy Bogues.
Yeah, you got to get a mathematician on that, right? Like, what are the odds of that, right?
Right. What are the odds in that? And this was pre-AAU. So these kids were all from East Baltimore.
They were not recruited. This was not some academy out in the hills of the Appalachians, bringing in 5 all-stars. That really is the incredible part. These 4 kids lived, within 3 miles of each other.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, Reggie Williams and Muggsy Bogues lived, a few floors from each other in the same housing project in Lafayette. So, I guess so the things that I learned, I mean, it was like peeling back an onion. I mean, I don't want to spoil too much that's in the documentary, but there's some things that aren't. But there's some things that I didn't know that Reggie Lewis was basically cut from his high school basketball team at Patterson, and then was basically came over to Dunbar, and was the 6th man off the bench. I mean, I think that was something that I knew he wasn't a star at Dunbar, but I didn't know at the time that he never started a game, which is tremendous because you think about it, he goes on to Northeastern, becomes a star, and then obviously becomes arguably the best pro of them all. And so that was a big story. But then you get into like the personal stories of like Coach Wade and his relationship with his father, and you get into Muggsy Bogues and how Muggsy Bogues was when he was 5 years old, he was shot. And that kind of changed his life in terms of his focus and kind of determination. And so there's just, again, I don't want to spoil, some of the stuff that's in the documentary, but I learned a ton. And there was really, and I say this truthfully, I mean, this could have been a 3-parter, Nestor. I mean, this could have been something where we just focused on the high school, and then we just focused on them in college, and then in the pros. I mean, there's just so much rich stories that this thing could have been a lot longer, but we had to condense it for 30 purposes. But really, it was an embarrassment of riches.
Bobby Sabelhouse joining us here. He is a producer for all things 30 for 30, the Dunbar piece coming out, the Baltimore Boys, coming out on August the 8th. You can learn more up on his Twitter as well, at Bobby Haas, Haus. And, of course, many friends back here in Baltimore you have from your days, and you're out in California now. In these 30 for 30s, I often wonder, like, who sort of oversees it all and who makes these decisions and how these stories get told. But then once you tell one story like this, I'm sure you're, like, sort of sniffing around for 5 other stories that are this good because you want to make more films, you want to do this sort of thing. Well, what else are you working on these days, man?
Yeah, so, staying in the sports space, I have a a great scripted feature that I'm doing with acclaimed director Richard Donner, who directed all the Lethal Weapon movies. He directed the first Superman. It's a company that the Donner's company is a company that I worked at for quite a while. And I found this story. You'll find this fascinating, Nestor. So there was a guy at Sports Illustrated who did a article on me, kind of like, what I was doing post football. And this guy was a former Gator, but then he became a writer for Sports Illustrated, a guy named Andy Staples. And so I sat down with Andy in Santa Monica, and we were sitting around, and he was interviewing me for the article. And I turned it around on him, and I said, well, listen, after you're done with this article, I want you to tell me about any sports stories you think would be good movies. And he said, I got one. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, there's this high school football team in Kentucky, and it's on this military base called Fort Campbell. And there's this coach who got there when he was 26 years old. He took over a program that was fledgling, and this was in July of 2001. And then September 11th happens, and every single one of his kids at his program, their fathers get sent, and some mothers get sent overseas to fight in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so he's left to kind of be a father figure at 26 years old, and also, a mentor and head coach. So it's called Sons of Soldiers, and we're getting ready to put it together and package it with a big actor. Going after some big names. We're gonna, hopefully go after guys like Channing Tatum, Chris Pine, Chris Pratt. So we got some big names on our list. So I'm kind of staying in that sports world, but I also have I have a romantic comedy with the director Brett Ratner, and I also have a thriller with the Walking Dead producer Galen Hurt. So I'm a little all over the place, but I'm starting to kind of focus more on sports because that's my passion.
Come on, Bobby, when you gonna put me in the movies, man? I've been acting like a sports radio guy here for 25 years. I'm a hell of an actor.
I know you are. I've been listening to you for a long time. I just got to find a character for you to play.
Oh, right. Maybe I can play myself, like Cosell used to do. Now, for you with this Dunbar story and getting back with all these folks here, obviously there's some tragedy involved in this too. Some of these lives have gone on and have been altered, and obviously the Reggie Lewis story. Looking back on all of it, I guess these guys must feel some sense of, because they're not together anymore. Right? They're kind of all spread out and whatnot, as we all tend to be as we get a little older in life. To bring them all back together again, that must have been something for you as well. And I know a couple of years ago, they had a reunion here. Tommy Polly worked incredibly hard to put together a project because he was a little a little younger than some of those guys, and looked up to all of them and wanted to do something to honor them, and even felt like in Baltimore they hadn't been honored properly here.
Yeah, I think that's. Listen, you get to a certain age, and these kind of reunions are very special. And I think we had it was a really neat experience to be involved in this project, in the sense that at the end of the project we actually got all the guys to come back to the gym, and Coach Wade was there, and again it's some of it's in the documentary. Some of it's not, but we kind of had a reunion practice. And so we had Muggsy dribbling up the floor, shooting layups. We had Reggie Williams out there. These guys were in Under Armour jumpsuits, warm-ups. And I was kind of in awe of it all. I mean, these guys, after all these years, had come back together. And, some of them had seen each other. Like you said, some of them hadn't seen each other in years. But I think, for them to come back and relive the memories, and you're hearing these stories firsthand, not only from, I call them the big five, or the big five, not only from Wade and Wingate and Williams and Muggs, but you're hearing from other guys that were bench players that went on to play Division I basketball, which was so remarkable about this team, as these guys, even the bench went on to play for Syracuse, UNLV, other major programs.
South Carolina after that, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was, but the relationship with Georgetown, right, and the anti-Maryland thing. Did you get into the film? Because my takeaway, especially into the '90s, when after Len Bias had passed, and Len Bias is also sort of a part of all of this as well, being a local kid in Maryland, and Keith Booth finally sort of breaking the code and going to Maryland after so many of these kids didn't go to Maryland. There was a lot of drama, behind that, and that was before all the money got involved. And as you said, AAU and sneaker contracts and all of that nonsense that came a little bit later on. Well,
we don't go too deep into that. but we do go into Len Bias. We do go into Coach Wade leaving Dunbar and going to Maryland, and we discussed that. I think it's not a huge part of the film, but I think you'd be doing the film an injustice if you don't talk about that. But we didn't really go into the whole Georgetown of it all. I mean, listen, we talk about Coach Thompson was a mainstay in that Dunbar gym. Recruiting Wingate and recruiting Williams, and he won his one and only national championship with those two guys. So certainly, Wade had a really great relationship with Thompson. But other than that, we don't really go into it other than, kind of setting up how Bob Wade got to Maryland.
Bobby Sablehouse joining us here. You can follow him out on Twitter at Bobby Haas, Haus. Of course, Baltimore sports playground. I call you a playground legend or a gridiron legend around here. You get home much, man? I don't see you around here. Every time I see you, you're out in L.A. somewhere.
Actually, my parents moved from Baltimore, so I don't really have a home base. But when I come home, which was a lot during the filming of Baltimore Boys, which was great. I got to crash on some friends' couches, and these documentaries don't have big budgets, so I couldn't stay in any fancy hotels.
I was going to say my couch is here. If your parents aren't here anymore, I got a place for you, man.
I appreciate that, but I definitely plan on coming back for. I'm still a huge Baltimore Ravens fan, big Baltimore Orioles fan. But I do plan on coming back to a game. I just got to figure out which one I'm going to come back to this fall. But Baltimore's still my hometown. Anybody asks me where I'm from Baltimore, and I live in L.A. That's that's pretty much my standard answer.
Hey, last thing for you, and I have to smile because, we do this on YouTube. We do it out on Facebook Live, and I'm looking down on your Twitter, and I saw the minute-long little trailer, for the film, and a lot of the trailer, and I see Bob looking a little older in his suit and whatnot, and I don't have the audio up, but I'm seeing all of the highlights. And I remember the last time I talked to you was when you were trying to get the project going, and you sort of called me in a frenzy. You needed me to help you find anybody that had footage, right? Like there was a whole trove of lost Dunbar footage because there weren't a whole lot of cell phone cameras back in the 1980s. And a lot of this footage was either pro shot by Channel 2, 11, 13, 14. There was no 45 then. They didn't even have a news department back then. I mean, they're probably archivally, there probably wasn't a lot of stuff there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think going in, and you're absolutely right, going into this, the biggest hurdle for us was finding archival footage. And I remember speaking to you about it. I spoke to a couple other folks just because I wanted to get the word out. Because, I mean, listen, no one was video, like you said, no one was videotaping these games. And if they were videotaping over them. So there just wasn't a lot. But we did find a little treasure chest over at the University of Baltimore.
My alma mater, by the way, even though it says Angelos on the outside.
Fantastic.
I have nothing to do with them for that reason, but it is my alma mater. So
anyway, University of Baltimore was so helpful. I mean, they kept the archives, pre-1986 for a lot of the stations. I think two out of the three major. I guess you said Fox 45 wasn't around back then, but two of the three major stations, and so we were able to dig up some good Calvert Hall footage, some of them playing in the Baltimore arena, playing against some local rivals. But it was a challenge. That was one of the biggest hurdles for us was finding high school footage back from the 1980s. It was difficult.
Well, hey, man, great luck with everything. The hashtag is Baltimore Boys. It is the name of a ESPN 30 for 30 special coming on August the 8th. Bobby Sablehouse is our longtime friend around here and one-time quarterback, now making films out in Hollywood. So, hey, man, next time I get out to L.A., I'm going to look you up, and we're certainly going to be looking this thing up. Congratulations on making the baby, right? I mean, everybody talks about doing stuff, and I remember a couple years ago you were talking about it, and it's all beer talk until it actually happens. This must be a real proud time for you, Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, getting anything made, in this town is tough.
In this cesspool of Los Angeles.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just tough, and to have a story that I'm personally connected to because it's my city, it's our city. It makes it that much more special, and to be able to come on and talk to you about it, and I know how passionate you are. That's an understatement about Baltimore sports and the history of Baltimore. I think that, I think everyone will enjoy it, but I think people outside of Baltimore, it'll resonate with them emotionally too. So I'm really looking forward to it.
You know what I need to do? I need to track down, some of the other folks in this thing and really give this a proper promotion over the next week or two. We'll try to grab Muggsy and some other guys, have them come on and talk about it a little bit too.
Yeah, terrific.
I'm looking forward to it. We'll see it on August 8th. Bobby, I'm going to send everybody out to Twitter to say hello, okay?
Great. Thank you.
He is also my Facebook friend, Bobby Sablehouse. You can find him out on Twitter at Bobby Haas, Haus, making films out there, and, of course, also at thefilmhaus, Haus.com as well. We got Orioles. We got Ravens training camp around here. Lots of things going on. Luke's at the ballpark, but you can always find us out at WNST.net and in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our pal Bobby's pal David Katz listens and watches our stuff out on the West Coast using the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault, so that's a great way to do that as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. I just got back from Europe. I was over in London checking out things for the Ravens game over there on September 24th. We're going to have some party information coming your way out on the website as well. If there's any breaking news at all, that happens first on the WNST text service. That is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis Colatzos will be here this Thursday. Dennis is all fired up, man. It's football season, so he's ready to go 3 until 5 on the SSV on WNST, heard here on Thursday as well. Last but never least, our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox free of charge each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.